Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we are going to talk about Phalaenopsis and more specifically, my beginner recommendation for Phalaenopsis. A friend of mine had asked me a few days ago what type of orchid I would recommend for a beginner, and at first I wanted to say a path, but they probably are a bit more unforgiving than the Phalaenopsis, as well as a bit more unavailable. The Phalaenopsis is widely available. You can walk into a supermarket and find it. And to jump into the video, there are mainly two classifications of Phalaenopsis that are available to purchase, and they are known as the Phalaenopsis and the Phalaenopsis. Now, all Phalaenopsis orchids are Phalaenopsis, but the actual term Phalaenopsis is also used in the classification, so it's weird. So therefore, again, you have the Phalaenopsis and the Phalaenopsis. And the Phalaenopsis are known to be the warm bloomers that are found in the novelty with more of the species influence, and the Phalaenopsis are the cooler bloomers that are found more in the standards that you would find in your supermarkets and your big box department stores that are more readily available. Now, with regard to what would be my recommendation, it would actually be environmentally specific. So I break these two down into light green leaves and dark green leaves. This way, if I have a hybrid, I kind of know what care I want to cater to more, what species influence I would like to cater to more. So again, with regard to what I think is a beginner phal, it actually depends on your environment. If you have a nice southern facing window or nice bright grow lights, then your lighter green leaves are going to do fabulous. But if you do have a lower light environment, then the darker green leaves would be a lot better. And there are factors such as temperature that will play into effect as well. So let's go ahead and jump first into the darker leaf Phalaenopsis and their care. Here we are. So you may have noticed that I have shifted my camera down a bit towards the lower portion of my shelves because it is cooler down here because of the microenvironment, but there's also a bit less light. And what I mean by that, because the duration is still 12 hours, is that these orchids are just a bit farther from the main concentration of lights from up above. Now, just to scale back a tad bit, your darker leaf phals, again, are mainly found in your big box department stores, as they tend to be the big whites or the big pink blooms that you see. Now, these white and pink blooms are indicative of the species that are in the background, which tend to be more of lower light orchids in nature. So for the white flowers, you mainly have the species of Amabilis and Aphrodite, which are also completely white phals that are found in nature. Big white, very, very long-lasting blooms. And then for the pink phals, you have phals such as the Pulcherima, which I actually have here, and the Schilleriana, which is also here. And these two species are primarily responsible for the pink blooms, as well as the mottled leaves that you may see in some of the phals that you purchase in the department stores. Many of them, because of this influence, will have strong upward spikes. And this influence also does have strong spikes, but mainly is responsible for producing lots of pink flowers and just that pink, strong pink influence in the background for the Schilleriana. Now, jumping into light, again, you can see that they're on the bottom shelves, so they are considered low light orchids. And again, I do provide about a 12-hour minimum, and I do say minimum as indicative of the winter months. So during the winter, I do have a timer that I turn the lights down to 12 hours, and I sort of give or take sort of imitate the sunrise and sunset hours. So I'm either a few moments after, excuse me, let me scale that back. My lights normally come on about an hour after whatever the sunrise time is, to give the plants an acclimation to the adjustment of light. And the light does also help with the blooming with the darker phals, but because of the species influence of them having the more Phalaenopsis classification in the back, that's going to be more indicative of temperature. So although they are warm growing, and what I mean by that is they prefer temperatures above and around 75 degrees Fahrenheit. However, if you want blooms on your darker leaf phals, you do have to induce your spike with a temperature drop of about 10 to 15 degrees in the fall time. And normally for me, to play it safe, I try to make sure this drop is a good 2 months long until I see spikes on everything. I don't have a lot in spike this year because of the setback during my move, but it's almost a sure shot way. I mean, if they don't bloom in the summer in the heat, then the fall time is your chance to really play with those temperature drops to get them to bloom. So moving on to water, I do find that the darker leaf Phalaenopsis are very drought tolerant, which means that you can let these pots go extremely dry for quite a bit of time. I never recommend letting your pots go dry in the summertime for more than 2 or 3 days, but in the wintertime they can almost stay dry for a week. And just to scale back on winter, because something that I'm learning is that winter's not the same for everyone. So for example, for me, my winter's about a month and a half long here in the desert in Las Vegas. My winter probably started somewhere in December and we are leaving it right now. The temperatures are slowly creeping up and January is just ending. So a lot to learn here. I mean, my temperatures right now are about 73 degrees inside without the heat running, and it's dropping. So I only have it off because I'm filming the video. But again, they're extremely drought tolerant. So I normally water when they're completely dry, and I gauge that by the pot weight. If the pot is super easy to pick up, then it's time to water. I don't really let my orchid leaves show signs of drought because orchids are very slow growers. And if the leaves are getting a bit shriveled, it is time to water, but you probably have to soak it. And when you get into your winter seasons and cooler seasons, soaking becomes, or it can become, a challenge with regard to the invitation of rot. Lastly, not going to touch on humidity too hard, but I do have 3 humidifiers, including this big one in my grow space, and my humidity, oh man, I still struggle because I run the heat and my air unit quite often. The humidity just zaps, as well as leaving my balcony door open. Not so much in the winter time for leaving the balcony door open, but definitely running your air unit will zap your humidity. So right now I'm struggling with, let me see, it says about 32% humidity, which really isn't bad because it's normally 15 if I don't have the humidifiers on. And I also have fans to circulate humidity, which I do change the speeds on quite often depending on how humid it is. So right now, because the humidity is low, the fans are low because I need the little bit of humidity in the air not to dissipate so quickly, but to still move around. And when my humidity is high, I kind of crank the fans up to make sure that the airflow is increased and that there's no water sitting on the leaves, which doesn't happen often, but it does happen once in the blue. It has happened twice so far. So let's go ahead and move on to the green leaves, the lighter green leaves. And you know what, after this, I'll go ahead and give you my strong recommendation to what I think the best Phal is for a beginner. But again, it is environmentally specific, but I'll give you my recommendation as well. So let's go ahead and move to the greener leaves. All right, so here we are on the higher shelves where I have a bit higher concentration of light. I don't want to say I grow under extremely bright grow lights. These are just Barina LED grow lights from Amazon, and they work perfectly. They've done me so much justice over the past 2 years, so I've just continued using them. And again, back on the lighter leaf Phals. So as of recently, you can probably find a lot of these lighter leaf novelties and hybrids in your big box department stores. This one here in the view is actually from Whole Foods. And with the increased circulation of novelty and species in the orchid community, these are probably gonna pop up a lot more. But if you look to the right, you'll see I have what's called a primary hybrid. It's a hybrid between a Violacea and a Pulchra in the corner there. And those have extremely round leaves. Lots of spikes and smaller flowers. That's a bit more on the novelty side. And this is more on the side of your standard novelty. And not to make it too complicated, all you have to look for again is the light green leaves. If the leaves are lighter, they're closer to the plants that just want a bit more light. So a background like how we talked about some of the species in your bigger standard darker leaves, some of the species behind these orchids, let's take for example your mini Phals, are going to be a plant called the Equestrius, which is very, very tiny, used in hybridizations to make minis, and some of the alba species. So the species form of an orchid does have an alba form, which is like an albino form or all white, completely pale form. And this form of the flower tends to be smaller. I'm actually seeing this used in a lot of Gigantea hybrids. So when you have the alba form of a Gigantea, which is a very large species orchid, it tends to be very, very smaller in size because of the genetic effect. Now, with regard to your novelty Phals, or as I like to call them, the one-of-a-kind Phals, you're gonna see more of the species that have your colors and fragrance, such as your Amboinensis, which is, it's known for sort of a soapy floral scent, but it's more known for the sunset flowers, such as the Sogolorens. And then you have the crowd favorites, the species Violacea and the Bellina, which are known also for their fragrance. The Violacea is known to be a spicy sweet, and the Bellina is known to be probably an overbearing sweet, very, very sweet. And these normally have, as you can see in the picture, very round leaves, very, very round leaves, which I particularly love. And again, many of them will have a fragrance. This orchid that's in the picture, let me just see if I can move this up a bit. She's a yellow orchid, again, a no ID standard from Whole Foods, and she didn't have a scent when I purchased her, but she has a very, very, very faint scent now that she's in the grow space with the humidifiers and under the grow lights, which I found very interesting. So that tells me lots of light. And as you can see, she's very close to my grow lights. I don't have any issues or challenges putting orchids close to these grow lights because they don't emit any heat. And once those leaves start reddening, if they do, I may pull it away from the lights, but as long as they don't, she's gonna stay right there. So now that we're on the topic of light, again, these lighter leaves Phals will enjoy higher light, as you can see. But most of them don't require a temperature drop to bloom. So in the summertime, when you have those maximum light hours of at least 12 and above, in the summertime I do crank up my hours all the way up to 16 in the heat of the summertime. But these normally are triggered by heat. And once you have that consistent heat of above 77 degrees Fahrenheit and your lights, for me, I play it safe and run them at least 14 hours. Normally, for my novelties, they bloom, they start to put out the spikes when my lights hit 14 hours. I think it's because they're sensing that there is an increase in light. So I normally crank it up to 16 hours to keep those in bloom for as long as possible. And you decrease that light and the temperatures in the winter. And there are people who use tricks such as heat mats and keeping your lights up to keep these babies blooming all year round, actually. With regard to watering, whenever I have the lighter leaves, I do not let the pot go bone dry. If I do, I don't let it go bone dry for more than a day, no matter what the season is. I do find that they like to be watered or enjoy a good thirst quench as they approach dryness, and not necessarily when the pot is super light. I don't keep it, it's a tough sort of, I don't know, habit to explain the watering for these, but it's sort of the same as my Paphiopedilums, where once I see the sides of the pot are a bit crunchy, but I do have water at the bottom, I do proceed to water. I don't let the pot completely dry out. And in the summertime, for the most part, I do keep a tiny reservoir at the bottom, because the summertime here, there's no humidity and the temperatures are extremely high. And going to work, I know my humidifiers are going to run out, so I do leave reservoirs at the end of watering day so that I can keep my routine to once a week in the summer and in the warmer months. Now I water about every 2 weeks, which I enjoy. Temperatures for these, they will enjoy growing warm all year round. If you aren't able to keep your temperatures above 70 degrees in the wintertime, I would suggest spraying your medium as opposed to a complete watering, or I do measure out my water when my temperatures are very low and I need to water. I normally fill my cup to about 1/4 and pour that very slowly around the top, and that's the watering for the next 2 weeks. And it works because I do grow all my phals in complete spag moss, so I don't let them dry out completely, but the watering does become a bit tricky in the wintertime because the temperatures change so much. So again, temperatures are best kept above 75 degrees or around for your phals, and when in the wintertime, above 65 to play it safe, because when you get into below 60, that's when you get into like not watering at all, when you play with temperatures in the 50s, and that includes spraying. And I don't recommend testing your collection in temperatures that are below 60 degrees in the wintertime, because that's when you shouldn't water. Maybe you can test an orchid or two on it, but in my experience, I have gone well with not watering or spraying whenever my temperatures go under 60, which is extremely rare. And again, humidity is not something that I want to touch on moving along to this topic, but I do have, again, humidifier number 2. I do have 3 humidifiers in my grow space altogether with my orchids. And lastly, I did say I was going to leave you on my recommendation, and I would have to go with the darker leaf phals. The darker leaf phals are just much more easier, and again, if you don't get your blooms in around the summertime, you could always give them that temperature drop in the fall to see if you can get a spike. And something else that I also wanted to show you all was the anthocyanin on the darker Phalaenopsis. So if you take a look at these leaves, you can see that there's purple or red on the underside. And what this does is, if you have a low light situation, which it does dwell in, she lives all the way at the bottom there of the grow shelf, right down there. So if you have a low light situation, this on the bottom will help the plant to absorb more light from above, because what these purple undersides do is reflect the light back into the leaf. So if you have like a north window, or again, a small spot in your grow space that is very low light, those type of phals would be very, very great. And as you can see, there's a path there that has the purple undersides as well. More in light because I'm trying to get it to bloom, but these low light orchids are definitely a recommendation for a beginner phal. And the great thing is that they are overwhelmingly available in supermarkets and your big box department stores, so you don't have to search. And lastly, with the watering, you can let them go bone dry. So one of the challenges with most beginner plant hobbyists is that we overwater. I mean, I've lost so many to rot because of leaving the pots wet for too long. But an orchid, because, well, a phal specifically, because they're epiphytic, they will survive a bit of a drought. They will survive a bit of a forgetful watering mind, you know, and still give you, let's zoom up here, these beautiful blooms. You do eventually have to keep up your watering, but they're just a lot more forgiving, way more forgiving. And with that, I will leave you all and see you in the next video. Please be sure to like and subscribe, or if you didn't like this video, please let me know why and we could fix that. But be sure to follow me on my social media page because I do post quite frequently. I'm getting back into my real game, and my name on there is The Right Path, just like it is on here. Thank you all for staying tuned, and again, I hope to see you in the next video.